So, a warm welcome to this launch of the Open Conversation series from Circle U. This is our new flagship series where we want to have conversations both in the room and online, which means that we welcome all of those online as well. Please feel free to ask questions and we will return to a Q&A at the end. We are Sam Smith from King's College London and myself, Lisbeth Breivik from the University of Oslo. And together with Gabriel Reedy, also from King's, we are responsible for the Open Conversation series. This series actually builds on and extends the Circle U cafes that we introduced in the pilot phase of Circle U. And we hope to have the same interesting debates about interdisciplinary topics and topics of high relevance both for our students and staff and our partners and all external public as well. So we encourage all academic directors and chairs and student fellows to submit proposals to future open conversations. Now I give the word to Sam to introduce today's conversation.
Thanks, Lisbeth. It's my very great pleasure to welcome Lucas Palumbo and Professor Funmi Olonisakin. Professor Olonisakin is our Vice President, got to try and get this right, International and Service. Have I missed something?
Only engagement in between, yeah.
International Engagement and Service, thank you. And I think originally when we talked about having an open conversation with Funmi, we thought that we would focus on a very European theme. But it occurred to me, I've had quite a lot to do with this project over the last year, and this project that they're going to talk about today is an incredibly ambitious, incredibly exciting, really uncharted territory, I think, for this kind of transnational education in Africa. And when I suggested the topic to the rest of the Open Campus team, they were absolutely, yeah, that's what we want. We really want to know more about this. So I think we've got quite a number of people logged in online. We've got a few people in the room here. Great to see you all. And I think Lucas and Funmi are going to have a kind of interview format exchange for 20 minutes or so, I think, and then we'll have some responses. We've got some student respondents here from the University of Oslo, and then we will open up to questions and comments, both from the room and from the online audience. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sam. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for making the time here in person and online. Thank you, Funmi, for also inviting me for that conversation. I'll keep an eye on the time as well, so we don't spend the whole afternoon just talking between ourselves. But it's good to have you for a bit for that conversation. And so starting very much from the beginning, I wanted to go back on the Afe Babalola Centre for Transnational Education. And Funmi, I'm sure you'll talk more about it, but it's the centre that underpinned the sort of vision for transnational education here at King's. And so going to the very beginning, Afe Babalola. So who is the inspiration behind that ambitious initiative, and the very reason we're having that conversation here today?
Hi, everyone. First and foremost, let me say a big thanks to my co-conspirators who not just conspire this, but conspire with me on a daily basis, on a regular basis, on the Afe Babalola Centre for Transnational Education project. I think, Sam, you said it all. We've been involved in this together for the past year. Lucas has been a great champion and hard worker on this for the past almost 2 years now.
Yeah.
Since Afe Babalola Centre for Transnational Education. It's a named center after an incredible individual. But I should say that this center exemplifies, as far as I'm concerned at this moment, a way to deliver a shared vision with this, and I will soon talk about the Afe Babalola man, but also at the same time to begin to do some global problem solving. And then you probably ask me, is this an African challenge or a global challenge? I think it's a global challenge we're trying to respond to within the context of Africa. In this role, when I took on this role in 2022, I was clear that, and I think the president of the institution also allowed me to do that, develop a KPI on an area of global education that I'm passionate about. Of course, this area, this came about because of the very acute problem in Africa, even though it's a global problem, of access to education. That access to education comes, or the lack of it, as far as the continent is concerned, comes from the fact that we have, at this point in Africa, depending on what, who you're counting and how you're counting it, we know for a fact we have more than 1.2 billion Africans. About 900 million of them are under the age of 35. About half of that 900 million are between the ages of 17 and 35. The acuteness of the challenge of access to higher education, or the lack of it, comes from the fact that only 10% of that 450 million, 17 to 35, is enrolled in higher education of any sort. And that's got to be the lowest in the world. In India, that has the same kind of population as Africa, more or less, access is about 27%. In Latin America, access is probably about 27, 28%. In China, much more. In Europe, much more, maybe averagely 44, even though some countries have as high as 50 or 60%. That is the challenge that requires global problem solving. Afe Babalola comes into the equation because at the time that we were plotting, a response to this challenge, this individual came along and provided the possibility for a shared vision. It was really an accidental meeting in the sense that we thought he wanted a partnership with kings of a traditional nature. At the end of it, we realized that actually he was looking for how to give greater access to Africans. He's a multimillionaire, Nigerian, a philanthropist, but actually a lawyer by training. It is how he got that training that makes this a special center named after him in perpetuity, in part. And that's because he was a very poor student in the 50s. He had only primary school education. He wanted to be educated. His parents couldn't afford it. He lived on a farm. And these are his own words to me and to others on several occasions. He said for 18 years he slept on banana leaves in the farm. But he then started following teachers around his village, sitting in the classroom with them, learning from them. Long and short, he took what he called not even remote learning. I think it was distance education, they called it at the time. He would write his exams in the British Embassy. It would be posted to the UK. And actually instructors from Wolsey Hall in Oxford would send him, instructions or guidance. He would study, he would write his assignment, post it back. Imagine how long postage took between Africa and Europe. I think I myself, having been raised by my grandmother in a village not far from him, I never knew him from Adam. It took us 6 weeks. It took an air letter card 6 weeks to come to the UK. So imagine 6 weeks each way. But then he will pass to the next level, and that's how he got his BSc Economics in 1959 through the London, through distance learning with the London School of Economics. In 1964, he got his LLB in law through the same method. He became one of the best lawyers that Nigeria ever had, made a lot of money. He's by no means the wealthiest person in Nigeria, but he has a lot of money. And he gave us 10 million for this shared vision. So that's how come the center is named after him in perpetuity. But it is actually to deliver global problem solving. He would like access. He would like every African that cannot afford education to have access across the continent. He's done a lot in Nigeria, built a university, given, a lot of money to higher education, but this is the cause. He's 96 years at the moment.
And I think it's important to mention he built his own private university after being the vice chancellor of the University of Lagos for many years, and decided that his contribution to his communities and to I think to Nigeria in general and that sort of contribution to this vision of giving access to kids would be better served by him essentially creating his own university. And so that is also, I think, where for him came the realization that opening a physical university, even in some of the most remote places in Nigeria, was also not what would bring skill, right? It's not what would enable all those underprivileged sort of kids to be able to access education, and building on his own experience. It comes back to leading to my next question, which is for him, distant learning is what has enabled his education, enabled his journey, enabled him to be who he is and where he is at this point. And so it relates to a very well-known concept at the end of the day in today's world and for Global North University, which is transnational education. Distant learning is now, be it under the form of online education, being under the form of opening campuses in other countries. We've seen that before. A lot of universities in Europe, in the UK, Australia, US do that. And so I wanted to come back quickly on that very notion, that concept of transnational education. And as I said, it's a very well-known concept for us, for Global North University, but for the Centre, it's trying to take a different spin on what it means. And so if you can maybe spend a bit of time just explaining to us a little bit more what the Centre means by transnational education and what we're trying to do here, and to what extent does it depart from the traditional understanding of it.
Yes, it departs, thanks Lucas, it departs from the traditional understanding in some ways, but not in all ways. And I think it's important to talk about this conceptually and practically. Conceptually, the most basic of terms, transnational education is that education you deliver in a country that is not the place where the student is based. We also know now that online education is part of that transnational education. When we talk about transnational education, that the Afe Babalola Centre for Transnational Education is talking about, conceptually, it is a bit of that. It is that as well. Mm-hmm. But it is also education that crosses on subjects that cross borders. So it is deliberate to educate around transnational issues of today across the continent of Africa, which you'll also find globally. Yeah. And those transnational issues are easy to connect with. They're around health, they're around technology, they're around sustainability and climate change, but they're around quite a number of everyday ways in which people are educated. So it's quite easy to connect. But I think thirdly, it's important to talk about the nature of that transnational curriculum. It's curriculum that not one university, not a King's or NYU, doing place-based education and doing it because the Global North way is that you're using it to attract more students. Yeah. And there's typically a commercial thing to it, not at this level. We're trying to bring African universities and institutions together who share exactly the same curriculum on a subject matter. And students, if you're in Kenya, can do that in a Nigerian university, if you like. If you're Nigerian, you can do it in a Kenyan or South African university. And ultimately, the ultimate ambition is that there will be one continental qualification framework in Africa on those sorts of subjects. And it's not, this is not, it's a shared vision with the African Union as well, because the African Union's Agenda 2063 envisages an education framework, a qualification framework for the whole of Africa. So Agenda 2063, really, so you understand, it's Africa in 2063. So the journey to that place is quite far. But transnational education in this sense is quite expansive. It is to offer opportunities across borders, offer the same quality, the same standardized curriculum on a particular thing across borders.
And I think it speaks to not only the curriculum, but it speaks also to the nature of the lived experience of young people in Africa, right? Where one of the main issues, and if we take the example of migration, for example, and sort of frequent conflicts, it also speaks to the ability of kids to start their education somewhere and not being necessarily impacted or restricted by the sort of environment in which they end up being, right? And that's why you're saying if a kid, let's say in some parts of Africa, end up having to migrate to another, we need to find a way to ensure continuity from the moment they start their education. I think it speaks to the pipeline as well, in the sense of and that also leads to the follow-up question that I had, which was on the distinction of the programs that we're trying to build. It's not just university undergraduate programs that we're trying to develop. It's not necessarily about building access or education for more nurses, for more lawyers, but it's really an integrated sort of education that the ABC is trying to propose, right?
Absolutely. I absolutely look at say that there are two things in that question. I wanted to come back on the movement of young people across borders. You know, sometimes we think migration is, Europe has had so much of migration. Africa has the greatest incidence of migration in the world. I myself, as a young person growing up in Nigeria, I remember I would hitch a ride from my university in Ife, which is 200 kilometers from Lagos. If I had a boring night on campus, myself and a couple of friends and a particular friend would hitch a ride from Ife to Ibadan to Lagos to the border with Republic of Benin to Togo.
To Togo.
And to Lao border, which there was a hotel there at the time, Rama Palace Hotel. We'd dump our things. We would be tired, but we would still try to go clubbing, right? And then we would spend the whole 24 hours just roaming the streets of Togo, right? And it's a street of Lome. Go to the marketplace, just do everything. Eat pizza, which was not readily available in that way in Nigeria. Eat Francophone food, and then hitch a ride all the way back. Today, unfortunately, young people move across those borders not for fun.
Yeah.
They move because they're fleeing things. They're fleeing experiences, conflict, bad, just a really bad climatic condition in their countries. And they're moving by the hundreds of thousands. If you go to the border between Nigeria and Benin Republic, it used to be hectic. I used to be able to take motorcycles across it. I don't even want to go there anymore. Maybe that's a situation of class. Yeah. But it makes the point that if you're a young person, if you're a young African, you find yourself having moved from Niger Republic across the border to Nigeria, or from Nigeria and you found yourself in Ghana, that you should be able to access on a simple device that kind of education. You should be able to call a number that gives you digital support. If you happen to have a teaching center in that country, you should be able to go there. That there's flexibility across the board and you're still accessing the same quality. But the reason why, and I should say, we say we will provide post-secondary, or if you like, pre-university all the way, post-secondary to post-doctoral. That there should be that pipeline, that fluidity all the way to that level. It's highly ambitious. The only thing we're concerning ourselves with at the moment is that foundational education. Because really, how are these people going to get a first degree if they've been out of university or out of high school for some time, which is the case in West Africa, in Nigeria, that I know well. About 2.2 million people apply to university every year. There are only 700,000 places. Even Afe Babalola's university can accommodate only 10,000 students. That's the real issue, that you want to give this flexibility at a very early level, build foundational qualification, which you can that gives you a pathway to progression, which you can either take to university or take to employment because it's of that quality. But before I stop, many young people want that accredited. They want a certificate they can take to an employer to say, I learned this. And that's missing.
And I think that's also one of the very points of differentiation, right? Which is, and we may come back to that, but as part of the Afe Babalola Centre, or ABC for short, or how we came to call it, we've done a lot of needs assessments over the last few months, and one of the things that we keep hearing is education is present in those different countries, even at pre-university level, but there is a real issue of actual certification, what they call the mushroom schooling, which at the end of the day is there is capacity in countries. There's a lot of private providers, but I think that what you're saying around the harmonized curriculum is also, and the sort of harmonized accreditation system is extremely important in the context of Africa, where there's no I would say not necessarily a real structure to guarantee that kids that go through a certain school will get the outcome that they want. And I think that is also one of the points the ABC is really about, is ensuring the quality, right? It's making sure that there's quality education that is recognized, that is harmonized across the continent. And I think it really speaks to that differentiation. And one thing also that you just mentioned is on the different outcomes of that education. I think we talked about the pipeline as necessarily being a pipeline for higher education, but I just wanted to come back really on higher education being one of the outcomes for those students. And I think one of the ABC ambition, obviously, is to create that pipeline, give access to higher education. But most importantly, and again, that's also my belief in working in that space, is we want to be transformative for those people, for those young people, whatever that means. And so if you can come back quickly on maybe what do we mean by enabling employments? Is it what does it mean for the curriculums, for the programs that we're developing?
I'm glad you came to that issue. We were present in some of the places where we did a needs assessment. This year I see Chris is in the room. Some of us went across the continent. I didn't do all of that, but you did all of it, Luca. Yep. So you can speak to it a lot. Spoke to more than 600 people. Combination of learners themselves, teachers, skills providers for young people, and employers. But for the learners, and that's very interesting, the outcomes they wanted was not just to be employed, right? Some of them actually have had multiple employments. The outcome they want is to be the kinds of individuals that can do meaningful things in their communities and countries. Of course, they want to be employed, to be well paid, to be meaningfully employed, because some of that employment is really they get peanuts, they get paid peanuts for it. But that's what speaks to the kind of education you want to give an individual that wants transformation of self in order to transform their community. And actually, it's a very, very inspiring thing. But ultimately, you want to be able to deliver an academic content, an introduction to the discipline they want to go into, the area they want to go into, but skills that would get them, but the transformational sorts of skills, which actually they can be time consuming. It takes a lot to deliver them on a day-to-day basis. I designed a leadership program here at King's, and I know that it takes a lot. It has a parallel mentoring program, and it takes a lot to do that compared to the academic program, and some work-place learning, you know, and all of that, to be able to pull that into a qualification could be amazing. But that's the kind of outcome. That qualification that has all those elements can get that student through the door into a university, but especially also into employment. And I think it's the kind of employment. Some of them are quite entrepreneurial, and I don't mean in the business sense too, but in terms of, socially enterprising people who want to make things happen. That adds complexity. But it also means that that's the kind of challenge we want to fulfill with a curriculum like that.
And I think, if I may, it also speaks to the reality of the lived experience of those young people, where employment, traditional employment, the way we understand it, as in you go to business and you get a job, is I don't want to say limited, but on some in regards to just the capacity of the economy to absorb all those young people into formal employment is difficult. And we've heard a lot of those young people either being entrepreneurial in their way to seek income, be it informal employments, or be it in the way we heard young people having businesses already, being working on a farm, designing clothes, breeding air, I think it speaks to that resilience, right, and to the capacity of the young people we met to create something for themselves, if they're given the capacity to do so, if they're given the right tools and the right sort of skills. Again, there is no doubt that they can actually change the situation of their communities, and I think it's also through that route that change can happen in the communities, is by pushing sort of individual drive and the individual change that can happen by providing transformative education.
Absolutely. I know that we are going to be running out of time soon.
Yep.
I just wanted to give you an example of that. When I was at the United Nations, and I think we were responding to the situation in Sierra Leone at the time, and all these refugees were in Guinea. They were in Cote d'Ivoire. You could just look at the Mano River countries. That entire region was awash with refugees. So I went with the Undersecretary General to Guinea. And my goodness, and I went there a few more years. My research on youth vulnerability and exclusion in Africa actually also, and with Guinea as a case study, also was inspired by those experiences at the UN. But one of the case studies that emerged in the end was an 18-year-old who pieced together all the scrap metals in his village or in his area on the outskirts of Conakry. And I'm sure we have it on video because we still teach it in the youth class at ALC. He had this antenna that went all the way to the sky, and it was full of, sometimes it tied with rags. What was he doing? He set up a small radio station on market days to announce, because there were always little children in this really big market. Imagine all the refugees, people just milling around. So little girls in particular, and little boys too, will be lost. Parents looking for their children. He was announcing at that radio station, if you've lost a child, her name is so-and-so. Of course, there were no cell phones at the time but I can imagine he would have beamed it into people's WhatsApp. Your daughter is here. Come to the corner of so-and-so and so. I'm trying to say there's a massive innovation across developing societies, but especially in Africa, where just even basic things are not always available. It's not a matter of big cities, in those villages. And that actually is the kind of creativity you see in the young people we're talking about, who want so much more, right? In terms of the outcome that they want for themselves.
And I think at the end of the day, it's also how we're always, as I guess, the Global North University, thinking about impact, right? And the SDGs, and to what extent are we contributing to the SDGs? And I think this is also one of the answers that potentially could be provided to those questions, right? How do you bring about change? It's also about enabling the people locally to sort of create that change. And I think it speaks to a lot of different agendas, the decolonization agenda, and how knowledge is disseminated, produced, how change is brought about. And I'll come back to a couple of questions which might position that differently for the relevance for Circle U University and Global North University, but maybe one last question on the center itself, which is a twofold question around what do you think are the biggest areas, the disciplines where the center could have that most transformative impact? And then the second question is, what do you think is, at the end of the place of technology? We talked about online education. I just wanted to take a couple of minutes to really unpack that notion that technology is at the crux of it, because technology is also a massive opportunity, but it's also a big challenge, knowing the sort of environment in which the students are in, right? With no Wi-Fi, no hardware, none of those things. So maybe on what are the disciplines and what's the role of technology?
So I'll take it the other way around. Lucas, technology is everything. It's like Afe Babalola himself said to me the first time we spoke about this. He said, what you're trying to do online, that was distance education. I said, yes. He said, the difference is at that time, it used to take months for me to receive my essay back. But now it's just at the click of a button. And that's exactly what it is. But what it does, though, it allows you to do so much more. I think we know that. Scale is everything. If you're talking about 450 million, not, that, easily you have some 300 million who may want to go to university in the next, decade or two, who will not have access to it, or who even want to receive some quality education but will not have access to it. Technology allows you to scale. But as Afe Babalola himself reflected with me, he said, well, how about the indigent, students who are in those villages, may not have electricity, can't charge their phones and so on. So there's a technological challenge too. So we can reach many, but how do we solve the problem without creating another kind of class divide of ensuring that the devices that people have access to, they can get not just for cheap, but I guess that's part of the challenge we face as a center, to give access to such devices. And we're already talking to some companies around what they can provide or not, but gives you access to solar technology to charge it. But that also you bring partners along. Global problem solving is not about one or two people trying to fix a problem. It's about the whole world, right? What it is, it takes a village to raise a child, as they say. It's about all the partnerships that we can get with tech companies, with telecom companies, who can give the data for that, because without the online element, we cannot scale. That's a challenge that all those universities with small numbers, 50,000, 10,000, that's what they fail. That's what they face. They can't scratch the surface. I'm not saying all of them are interested in reaching the brightest and the poorest, right? But the fact is, to solve this problem, that's what it requires. And did you say in what areas?
Yes.
As I said at the start, those areas are areas where, people face everyday problems that they can hardly respond to. Healthcare in the community. So healthcare in its different guises and manifestations that might lead a young person to take a stab at basic community health, and then move through progression pathways, either through employment or education, into nursing, midwifery, medicine. I mean, I guess the sky is the limit for them. But certainly in areas of technology, the problems on the continent of Africa, just like in many parts of the world, many other parts of the world, can be alleviated through just basic understanding of technology to transform everyday lives. Whether that technology moves from coding to computer science to whatever it is, there are a lot of conversations, engineering and design, there are a lot of conversations going on around this. Education itself, I should say that, and I didn't manage to talk about the theory of change, but at least to talk about the building blocks in the Afe Babalola Centre. We plan to reach 1 million people, a million young Africans by 2030, at least through some form of enrollment or the other. And we're also talking about a pipeline. In that pipeline, they will move into first degree. Those who can move into masters, and we have different partnerships. University of London, for example, is a big partner in trying to make creative economies reachable to a large number of African graduates already at postgraduate level. But the training of teachers, you can't reach 1 million people without preparing the teachers who will reach those million young people for pedagogical training online. That's what Sam and others are leading at King's. So the kinds of partnerships that will help us get that. And if you did a back of the envelope calculation, we started already with educators who will train the teachers, right? So when you train the teacher has to be able to deliver to a foundation level qualification. It's a mark of excellence that says this is a King's quality education. And of course, if it's another university, this is the quality education. This teacher can teach at that level 3. Back of the envelope calculation, if one teacher teaches, say, 50 students, it means you need 20,000 teachers. They will get PG certs from King's. We're starting little. We're putting a template down, and then we're going to keep testing, piloting. We're piloting with the first 100 teachers next year, or at least maybe half of them will be trainers, the other half will be teachers. We keep building up on that. But imagine if you have 1,000 teachers and each would train 50.
Yep.
That's 50,000. And you keep doing the multiplication like that. But let's test that the system works, that there's a template that can deliver that, and then we pilot it. You know this better than I, because you've been having sleepless nights with me on those issues. That's the idea. So the point is, education is at the core.
Yep.
When we say which areas,
Yep.
because those teachers themselves are going to build careers from it. From PG Cert, they get their PG Dip, masters in their institutions. So the sky is the limit for a problem that looks like that, is the point I'm trying to say. But everyday areas, everyday issues, law in the digital space, but technology, some of the refugees we met during the needs assessment in Kenya, for example, they already work online.
Yep.
They have jobs online. And many of them would have jobs in the online space. It's how can we expand the opportunities to do that?
And there's something that you just said in regards to that pipeline of teachers, and I think it's important because it's never been the intention that all those teachers will suddenly be enrolled at King's and becomes poached and come to the UK to teach from here, right? And I think that's a very important point in speaking to the role of the continent itself and how our role as King's, as a global North institution, is at the end of the day one to ensure the quality of the degrees, but also ensure that we convening the right partners, but that we essentially building capacity in countries, and we're not here to brain drain is often quoted as a big problem. I think that's also one of the issues we're trying to go around by really giving a space and giving the place of local institution. It's giving them back the agency and the opportunity to actually reach their own constituencies, which again speaks to the decolonial aspects of what we're trying to do here. And so, speaking about the role of King's, I also just maybe wanted to, conscious of time, wanted to move slightly to question that will speak to Circle U universities maybe more directly. And one of them is around the internationalization strategies of universities such as King's, and to what extent does the centre, and we touched at it a little bit already, but to what extent does the centre represent, I guess, an important turning point, right, in regards to how Global North conceive and implements the internationalization strategies. And I think we've got some recent data from opportunity scholarships. I think that you mentioned we were discussing the University World News sort of article that got released about Erasmus funding. And yeah, to what extent does that mean there is opportunity for to conceive internationalization differently for our type of universities?
That's an amazing question, and I will try, because I don't want you to get me started on internationalization. I will try very hard to just contain myself to the very question you've asked. I think in its most basic form, what motivates internationalization in Global North institutions is the need for international students. I wish, I don't want to sound like that, but the commercial aspect motivates a lot. And you can look at that in the UK because it's the universities in Europe. Maybe I can't be talking to French universities like that, but if you look at the 150 or so universities in the UK, the more international students they get, the more they can solve some of their financial problems. Not sounding like that, internationalization has a really terribly commercial aspect because it's about international students for many institutions. But then you have institutions who understand the logic of, not brain drain this time, but brain circulation, as you would say, that exchange of thought, exchange of people across borders. It only enriches you. But even that itself, talking about the need to decolonize this, is that when you look at movement across borders, African students can't easily come to Europe. Even African academics can't easily come to Europe. We know the numbers that their visas are turned down and you have to show scholarships. As I speak to you, one of a PhD student coming to me was already denied a visa, and we still have to show that she has a scholarship with the African Leadership Centre. So it's not easy. An African student, a European student will go to Africa back and forth before an African. So there isn't equity there. It's the point I'm trying to make. But most of all, even when we then start talking about this kind of transnational education, people still think, how can I have an online program that many Africans and many Asians and so on, will pay for? All right. So I think we need to rethink it fundamentally. And what this Transnational Education Center, what ABC can do, ABC for short, can do, is to cultivate a new form of partnership in which we co-create, and we're co-creating here with 10 institutions across Africa. And we design together this program. When the program is done, and this will start with Sam to talk about quality, all sorts of things, those institutions can take that asset too. And we tested it before with 3 modules, not on ABC, with 7 African partners, 1 partner in China. You take the assets, put in your system, and give that quality curriculum to your students. But it also means if it's in the virtual space, we can teach together. But that doesn't stop your staff from coming to King's. I'm paying for it on the basis of the partnership that we have. But King's cannot be the be-all and end-all of education. And I think we're beginning to have a conversation here about various forms of internationalization. But for me, the internationalization agenda that I put to King's, which was approved years ago, upon which we're going to build a new international engagement strategy, is driven by 2 values, 2 sets of core values. One is cultural competency, which is why we exchange students in that way, right? Let's not dwell on the definition at this moment. The other is global problem solving, the ability to, produce students who will be change makers in the world and be relevant to solving the problems of their generation.
Yep.
And if you apply those 2 core values, I think there's quite a broad range of things you can do to realize that kind of transformation in an individual and in the community and in the world.
Yeah.
That's what I'll say about that.
And I think that if I may come back to your second point on global problem solving, I think it's also really interesting because it challenges a little bit also. Let me do it differently. I think that one of the questions that we often have in regards to what we're trying to do and the ambition of the center is how are you going to fund it? Who is going to pay for it? Where is the value coming from? And I think providing free education is also challenging in that aspect for African students. But I think it's for me at least, and that's how I've been conceiving it. And it's about training change makers. And if the education that can be provided to those young people, it actually enables them to change and solve some of those global issues. And we as an institution are able to demonstrate that it's through the education that they gain those skills and that they've been able to impact some of those global issues. Then the funding is there. We know WHO is putting a lot of fundings to address some of the major health issues. We know the African Union is doing the same thing in regards to a lot of different issues around development. And I think that also speaks to that. I think it's about trying to shift the narrative around funding is not just about NGOs that do dedicated intervention for developments, for health, but I think it's also trying to reframe the narrative around the impact that university can have on those global issues and saying that the transformative power of education is actually one of the drivers, right, and can attract funding for us to be able to deliver it.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, at the same time, I don't want us to give the impression, because it's also naive to think that you're building something that is just going to be free for many millions and so on. No, we're not necessarily providing free education. We're providing quality education that those who can afford it at a basic rate will pay for, right? But what you make, Afe Babalola himself does that. Hey, I hope this doesn't get circulated far and wide. He says in the private university, the students that can pay the fees pay, but that he quietly puts some, is it 5% or a certain percentage aside when he meets a really bright student whose parents are, who's orphaned or who's very poor, that he doesn't tell them that he has money for that, because otherwise everybody will come and want it for free, right? But then he has money aside to pay for the education of a bright person. The question is, who pays for it? If you're providing the best students in the world to an employer, that employer ought to And that's the employment aspect of what we do. Then they will sponsor X number of students. Then you can go to a regional development bank and say, this is the quality of students we're providing for healthcare. You can do the same for a foundation, with a foundation. So the education is paid for. It doesn't have to be paid for by a poor student. That poor student might still need to pay for their transport to get to point X or point B, but on the basis of what you can afford, you will pay something. But others are paying for a service that is being delivered for the continent. That's a business model, right? So ultimately it's not free because someone has to pay those teachers that we're training, isn't it?
I mean, always comes at a cost. And I think we're running out of time, right? So maybe last question to wrap up. And I think it's again a very probably interesting questions for partner university and for everyone in that room, which is, what are the potential, you think, lesson to be learned for European global North universities, considering some of the ambitions that have been outlined in the recent years around European degrees, and some of the challenges that we're facing as probably traditional and rigid universities all around that room, in regards to the European University Association sort of ambition and vision 2030 is something that we know comes with challenges. So what are the lessons we can learn from the ABC?
Excellent. And this is a Circle U event, and it's a great, we've just been having a meeting. We've just been in our General Assembly. And I think when you look also at the European Union's ambitions, they're not disconnected from the idea of Agenda 2063 that is talking about qualification framework for Africa. The vision of a European degree is a great one, but it requires that our culture of just seeing our universities as narrow spaces where it's only our degrees that are offered and so on, that you can actually have some shared programs, right? Where our students move around in the virtual space and in person and combine the modules. We're already co-developing modules. So I see us in another decade, even in as near as that, a shift in, a model of education, not, completely fundamentally, but allowing even a tiny percentage to move us in that direction, where because of the global challenges that we have, the modules we're constructing around climate and sustainability, global health, all those things can really be the building block for something that gives us something close to a European degree. And there's nothing that stops Circle U members from creating and making available modules that speak to some of the challenges on the continent of Africa we're talking about. It might be global health contextualized for the African environment, but it's a global issue. So I see this as offering potential lessons. I even see it, and I think University of Oslo is championing the way at the moment on a global university concept, for example, which is targeting refugees. Right? And if you're targeting refugees globally, this form of education, it means that a student actually who is stuck somewhere in the Sahel can access that virtually, because they've passed the foundation program here. So I think the interconnectedness is great. I just think that we can be more expansive, because the Erasmus formula, as you were saying, and I think that's University World News that carried that in the last week, where we're having exchanges between students here and in Africa and academics, just is not working. And that's why the African institutions, many of them have not even applied.
I think it's 100,000 PhD scholarships that have been undertaken in the...
I can talk on a normal level.
But I think it speaks to the sort of a different approach to education. It's no longer about selling, one university selling a degree, but it's about breaking it down, the stackability of it, the flexibility, the use of technology to scale and to enable mobility. And I think that was my last questions. We could go back into a lot more, but I'll stop there, conscious of time, and I'll head back to maybe Funmi if you have anything to close or this.
No, I mean, I'm just excited about this. I mean, I think, Lucas, I could go on and on about this. I think we're experimenting with something that might just offer a solution to a problem in one part of the world, which actually is applicable to, to problems everywhere. And I think that's the excitement of this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy that we can have this talk as a Circle U conversation, and it's not over. You have been talking about students, and I'm very happy to introduce two student fellows in Circle U. They are students at the University of Oslo, and they would like to share some commentaries based on your talk and the centre. So first of all, Christina Dragland, please. We are excited to hear what you have to say.
Thank you so much, Lisbeth. And thank you, Professor Olonisakin and Lucas, for your conversation. Very interesting to hear. And thank you, Circle U, for inviting me, and King's College as well for welcoming me so well. I have to say, I have also done some reading on ABC and had a previous talk to Lucas before this conversation. So some of the things I touch upon might be also from there. So as a student, what strikes me about the ABC is how they look at the diversity of students. And in particular, I know that you're thinking of ways of tailoring the education to the individual student. And that you see the education as a journey. Yeah. And because a student might have other obligations, such as family, or there might be financial issues. And by tailoring the education, it could allow the student to stay in the education. For example, they could study for a while, then go back, looking after the family or working for a while to save up some money and then come back to studying. And this resonates with me as well, because I'm also a mother of two and a student. So I know about some of the challenges with having family ties. I forgot to mention that I'm a previous psychology student, and at the moment I'm just started a master in public health. And I also have a previous master in fine art. So as a psychology student, I'm very interested in the ways to reduce stress and also improving mental health. Do the students have a head full of stress, or is it space for learning? As some of these students might have experienced stresses like displacement, marriage crisis, it might be discrimination or poverty. And on top of that, when becoming a student, there's also some particular stresses just to being a student. And these stresses, they can be a life transition. Maybe they're moving, maybe they're a new social networks, maybe there's a loss of old social networks, maybe they experience loneliness or financial stressors or academic stressors. So I was excited to hear, because Lucas told me about your idea of learning hubs, to have some physical places for students to meet. So I think first you will do this in the bigger cities and later in rural areas. And this seems to me like a good idea as a way of keeping the students in education, as physical meeting places has such a significant impact on mental health. And I've been a student myself in 5 different universities in 3 different countries, and all of these have had a big focus on the social environment as part of the learning experience. Third one, I was also interesting to hear how you've been mapping students and what kind of learners they are. For example, maybe some students are learn better by being a visual learner. And this also strikes me as an example of ways of dealing with academic stressors. If it's the way that they learn best, maybe it will keep them in education and reduce the stress. And you also touched upon the teachers as the mentors, and I also read that you're doing peer engagement, and and maybe students and teachers as role models. I also find this very interesting because it's enabling them to feel like their voices matter and that they can make meaningful contributions. And that's a really powerful way of building mental health. It would further, by building mental health, you would also create resilience in meeting future stresses and problems. And as Lisbeth mentioned, I'm a student fellow in Circle U, and I've been part of building Open Campus, and that's a job that has felt really meaningful for me. So I see ABC as could be a very important role in creating opportunities and promote and build mental health for the youth, growing up in challenging contexts. And education is so positively related to good health. So it could really help tip the balance in a positive favor for these young people. And mental health is related to well-being as well, which WHO defines as a positive state experienced by individuals and societies. It relates to quality of life and living and giving in a world with purpose and meaning. And it's also heavily influenced by social and environmental and economic factors. And in relation to the students' well-being, if the mental health is built stronger, it could also act as a preventative measure against future mental and physical illness. If they get to live in line with their values, such as looking after their family while studying, it could help with their well-being. If they get to live in a way that feels meaningful to them, such as making a meaningful contribution to the education offers, it would build their well-being. And also smaller, just positive momentary emotions would reduce stress and rumination. Further on, being a student could relate to the strong human need to belong and be socially integrated. And last, the well-being is also related to the UN sustainability goals. So in the future, it will probably be very important for the policy making in the future. So if it's just one thing I could wish for, it would be how universities take advantage of the role in influencing students' well-being and helping them thrive. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I would like to introduce our other student fellow in Circle U, also a student at the University of Oslo, Maja Kristine Eriksen. Yes, please.
Thank you, Lisbeth. Hello, everyone. My name is Maja, as Lisbeth has already told you, and I'm a student of renewable energy and nanotechnology, and I'm in my second year of my bachelor degree at the University of Oslo. And I will start with what first struck my mind when I heard about this center and heard you talk. When I was a child, I had a best friend, and we together collected money by doing chores at home so that we could be able to buy an experiment set for kids. And I still remember the experiment set. It was green, and then the box had a picture of a science man, and he had a lab coat and glasses and the normal crazy science look. And we did many experiments, and it was really fun. And one of the experiments, we tried to dissolve some stones. So we dipped them in vinegar, and my room stank for days, for weeks even. But the point is, I remember us having fun. And the fun was just seeing what's happening in the experiments and trying to understand it. I wonder about how the world is put together and just how we can understand the different concepts that exist. So we simply just had fun. And you might wonder why my thoughts is at the green experiment set for kids when you talk about this important topic of giving youth in Africa a better chance at higher education. And the reason for this is that I'm studying nanotechnology today largely because I had these kinds of opportunities. I had parents at home that could give me money for taking out of the dishwasher and taking out the trash, which it's a privileged way of living. And of course, this isn't the case for youth in Africa, or at least not most of them. So the ABCs offering opportunities such as economically and socially support, which will enable youth in Africa to take these kinds of steps. They will be able to wander and explore and delve into science and also other parts of you can study. And leaning into this, I will also applaud your plan to create local idols and change makers, because it's really important as a student who are at the start of their learning journey to have this type of idols. And I can speak for myself. Only in Norway, which is obviously a very well-developed country, there are only 27% of engineers that are women. And I get that extra encouraged when I see women who are professors or succeed in my field. Because we don't want to maybe enhance that we are different and we don't have all the same opportunities. And we wish it didn't matter which type of gender you had, where you come from. But it does matter, and we don't have the same opportunities. And building on my own experience, I will therefore say that I think that ABC, by taking this aspect so seriously as it does, has a very high possibility of succeeding with your plan. And furthermore, as you have already touched a bit on in your conversation, I think that someone might wonder how this is relevant for Circle U. It's a European University Alliance, right? And here the complexity of the world and sustainability and also its interdisciplinarity is really beautiful, and it gets to shine in its best way. Because as a student of renewable energy, sustainability naturally lays close to my heart. And sustainability is, as I'm sure you all know in this room, about using the resources we have at hand the best way possible. And as you said, only 10% of youth in Africa are enrolled in post-secondary education. And when I hear you talk, I imagine the same for my country. How would my day-to-day life look different if that was the case? And how would your day-to-day lives look different? I at least imagine mine very different. And then taking in the fact that by 2050, 1 out of 4 young people in the whole world will be youth living in Africa. What will the world look like in 2050 if only 10% of those people will have higher education? And I will give a really easy and maybe obvious answer to this question. And it is that it's at least not sustainable. To be able to reach the SDGs, we are dependent on using every bright mind as the enormous resource that it is, because it is a resource and we need to use it. And therefore, I think ABC is truly inspiring, because it is using every resource, or at least trying to use all the resources we have, so that we could be able to reach the SDGs and keep global warming as low as possible. And speaking about the SDGs, they are relevant also in local ways here. Because as you have touched upon, you plan to make mostly online offerings, and that makes the students dependent on the internet. And if you have internet access, which for us in Global North, this may be a thing to take as it's obvious for us, it's a part of our daily life, but that's not the case in Africa. It's often not stable internet connection, and you will have differences then for those who have stable connection and those who don't. But the plan to ABC is to create change makers, as I already touched upon, and then you will have youth that can be able themselves to innovate and build, for example, power stations, so that they will have internet, and therefore themselves could be able to get more education. In this way, it will also be local sustainability to the work done by ABC. And this example is truly inspiring to me. It shows the complexity of sustainability, but also how we can use and solve things with our education. And I'm also a student at Circle U and working within Open Campus. And I find it so inspiring that we can use the different educations that each student's degree of choice has something to contribute with. and we can use it to solve the complex problems that we are facing in the future. And it shows that it's a big picture we can see. And for me, who studies nanotechnology, and nanoscale is pretty small, it is nice to see that these things that might seem so tiny when you study them can have a use in the bigger picture and even have a huge impact. And in the same way that I said in the beginning, that it was important for me to be able to be privileged and study science from an early age without expectations, I think it is important that we as students, already from bachelor level, can be able to work interdisciplinary, to see across the disciplinary borders, because we need to see how the interdisciplinarity can be used. How is it useful to us in our future? And furthermore, it is important for our identity, because what we work with over time will affect how we identify ourselves. And ending all my rambling on the note of identity, I will say that if I could wish for one thing for the future, it would be that every child that wants one, no matter where they live, will get their own box with experiments.
Still on. Okay. Thank you all so much. That was really interesting. I think we let the conversation probably run a little bit longer than we'd asked you to speak for. So thank you for indulging us. But it was so interesting, and I think that you've probably got a lot of inspired people. I don't know if we can see. Can we see the audience online at all? But it would be quite nice to see some people online. But in the meanwhile, perhaps we can start with are there any questions or comments from within the room for any of the speakers? But I imagine particularly for Funmi. Yes, go ahead. Oh, let me bring your mic.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Carla Chavez from the Center for Mexican Studies here at King's. And well, the question is for Professor Funmi. First of all, now I have the task myself of investigating a little bit more about the African Leadership Center. But my question is regarding the agenda that you proposed and that King's approved of internationalization. I wonder, also I have to look into that myself, but I wonder if in that agenda, what is the perspective of moving from the exchange, the mobility as being like the internationalization goal, and is it moving towards virtual exchange or internationalization at home? Or, well, I don't know, like, I'm pretty sure that's one of the aims of that agenda, but I would like to know more about it.
Thank you. Should I respond? Thank you very much for that. At the time, the idea of focusing on cultural competency was that, and of course, global problem solving as well, was that going abroad should only be one small part of an internationalization agenda, that it should be possible for students here, for some of the reasons we've heard, students who may not be able to afford to go abroad, either because they're carers, they have families, they can't afford it financially, should not be doomed to just have some narrow focus to life. And so that's partly why we developed some programs on global leadership. For example, the previous president had started, we worked with him on the Principal's Global Leadership Awards, which, across 9 faculties will bring students together who were not just high performing, but had a sense of the change they wanted to make and the sorts of problems they wanted to solve. And for one term, they will be together. But we started on such a small number. Number one, the demand was so great among second year, so it's not the first year, as in second year. Then we extended it to master's students as well. Our ambition is still to make it available to as many students as can have it. But at the moment, we're only hitting about 200 students a year. So the exchanges, mutual exchanges will go on. We've lost out as a result of not being in the European Union anymore. The Turin program, which replaced Erasmus for us, does the opposite of what it's supposed to do, provides only one-way movement, right? But the idea is to expand students' thinking about the world, the world around them, the larger world, to get a sense of the kind of change they will make in, no matter how small that world is, right? That was the idea. So we thought that, at least my ambition was that by focusing on those core values, we'll begin to embed programs. The cultural competency program at the moment sits in arts and humanities, a unit that is serving the whole institution. I think it has 2 or 3 modules now, and there are about close to 1,000 students on those modules. And the person who's leading it moved from the medical school to arts and humanities. So this interdisciplinarity and a broader way of seeing the world. But actually, the biggest ambition was that every student should be able to access that course at the point of entry. So we have an induction in it, but that not just every student, but every staff member. Because if you do that for students, how about the staff? You don't want the staff to not, be able to expand their thinking. Talking about a decolonized approach. So it's a journey, but that was the intention.
Okay, yeah, very interesting. Thank you so much.
Right, thanks.
Thank you. Online audience, if you have a question, feel free to either type it into the chat or raise a hand, and we'll keep an eye on that. Are there anyone else in the room who has a question or a comment? Yes. Go ahead.
Yeah, my name's John George Nicholson. I'm in my 3rd week of working at the London School for Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. But for the last 11 years, I've been working at UCL within the Faculty of Medical Sciences, developing international collaborations and partnerships in education. So lots of this sounded very familiar today. One of the many things I was interested in was when you talked about a standardized curriculum framework across Africa, and at the same time, some of the things you were talking about in terms of cultural competency and customization. And I was just wondering if you could talk on potentially some of that tension between the two, and the kind of the diversity that exists obviously within each country, and is there sometimes a risk of flattening that diversity, which technology can be a great enabler, but there's also that risk there, if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. No, thank you for that question. It's amazing, because if you're from the London School, you are exposed to this firsthand, that we're dealing with a continent that is so diverse. In Nigeria, there are 250 ethnic groups, I understand, and about 600 languages. I don't mean dialects. Some Nigerians speak. Number one, I can't even tell sometimes from the name that they're Nigerian necessarily. And when they speak, even if they're from 2 states away, I don't necessarily understand them. We don't necessarily understand each other. That's the scale of the diversity. And then if you spread that across 54 or 55 states, depending on whether you're counting a place, some of these countries, that is severe. The thing about focusing on the transnational issues, and for young people as well, and using their own ways of interacting, because they do interact enormously across borders. And there are particular language groups as well. That language didn't come up, but there's going to be a big issue for us. We're focusing, of course, on English language for obvious reasons at the moment, and others have started challenging us on it. But when you focus on similar issues that connect them across the board, they themselves are trying to problem solve on those issues. And if we adapt to their own ways of working, we can begin to challenge it. But certain areas, I'm not in health sciences, but some of the health sciences people we have spoken to, when they talk about community healthcare, for example, and they talk about progression pathways, say into nursing, they see community nursing as a very low-hanging fruit, because apparently they're the same sort of things that you think about across the board. So I think it's about looking at the common, the lowest common denominators across the board, and then problem solving from there. Because that diversity issue, the biggest diversity, some people would say it's a blessing because it gives you, you have all sorts of possibilities. But in terrible governance environments, it's not a blessing at all. It actually creates more nastiness, for those who are trying to do their work well. But that's the kind of context that we're trying to navigate. And I think taking it, building it block by block would have to be the way to go with this. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm still not seeing any hands up online. The online audience are being a bit shy. Anyone else in the room have a question or a comment? No? Yeah, go for it.
Go ahead.
And you answered some of the questions I was going to ask when you talked about money and finance, which is something in the commercial I am interested in. And I'm just wondering whether incredible gift, £10 million, and that the story is inspirational. But already my brain was thinking the sustainability of the centre much further down the line, because we, want this centre to be there in 100 years. And I'm thinking, is there a discussion right at this early point about those other sources of funding? You talked about the WHO and other things like that. And in my last role, this was a discussion that was often had, and an uncomfortable discussion at the time. But there was a sense of how we operated. There was a sense of this Robin Hood tax is the quickest way to call it. So leveraging the high income countries and undertaking projects, perhaps in certain, countries where money exists, and then cross subsidizing into the kind of activities and that the centre is looking at, and not being afraid to have those conversations internally. That money surplus is not a dirty word if one is sure where that's going and it's doing the right thing and having real impact, because none of us have shareholders, certainly at the institutions that we run. But I sometimes wish that conversation could be slightly reframed, because it could have increased benefits for initiatives like this, which is incredible, and it's great. Thank you for everyone. It's been great to be here today.
Thank you so much. No. I'm looking at Sam and smiling because even some of the internal conversations, I mean, you hit the nail right on the head. If you want to be running a program like this beyond 10 years, today or yesterday is a time to be talking about how it will be sustainable. And I have to say that, okay, internally within Kings, we're not romanticizing this, but also the units that are trying to support us to develop this. And if they have good quality teachers programs, they need to be able to sell it to the high, high fee paying parts of the world, to the institutions who can pay for that, in order for them to continue to support this. So we're having that conversation, but we haven't reached a particular place, because we also understand that institutionally we have systems and processes, and it's a huge institution. They have to accept, the model that you're giving them. But the place where I've seen the largest entry point has been with employers, because with some employers, I don't think, and Brent is not here, Brent Dempster, who's been supporting us to have the conversations with employers across the continent. The potential for them, for this is huge if we do it well. Some tell us, foundation year, yes, they get it. They said even the university graduates we have, they don't have the skills that you're talking about here, right? So that if they see a good quality program, asking them to support X number of potential employees in the future is not going to be a difficult thing. But the thing is, you have to first prove that concept, that it works, before you see them through the door. The other sorts of places will be institutions that are looking at healthcare, or institutions that are looking at technology, companies that are looking at, young people that have the technological capability and so on. So we are exploring all sorts of things because unless there's something in it for them, even global North institutions will not necessarily give. It is in my X number of years in, academic practice or in the world of policy and practice, I've seen that. Even when they give, this will be the first to be taken away when there's scarcity. And I've been there before. So these are real, that's the question of sustainability is, at the back of my mind all the time. And we need to look at it from day one.
And I think if I may just add also for me is I wish I could say there's one solution, right? Like I wish I could, look at you and tell you this is how we're going to do it. But I think one of the things that Funmi mentioned during the conversation is the idea of piloting, right? It's the idea that those £10 million is essentially the foundation for something that is much, much bigger. And the idea is very much for us to try and develop blueprints, templates for what we're trying to do here and pilot it. Some of it is not going to work. Well, we hope not a lot of it. But at least we're trying, and I think it's the learning here. Not everything is going to work, but hopefully if we do it right, some of it will, and will generate further funding. And it's part of providing that proof of concept, the evidence that things work. And in any other innovation, we're trying to innovate in the sphere of education. It takes trial and error. So we don't have all the answers, but we hope that we know there are avenues that we're exploring. For example, Funmi mentioned that sort of cross funding of setting some of the teacher training to maybe teachers that are outside of Africa to be able to sponsor some. That's something we're exploring as one way to make that part of the program, that part of the center sustainable. There are other ways. Employers is one, leveraging further philanthropic funding, WHO, etc., the NGOs that wants to have tangible impact is another. And I think that's what I was trying to say, is that there's no one answer. The idea is trying to explore what could work and what we can make work, and trying to keep exploring this. And yeah, I think it's not one answer, but we'll keep trying.
We have got a couple of questions online, and both questions I know we've talked about quite a lot. So the first from Mike Winters is, does the centre yet have a high level blueprint for content creation, and creative economies being a good start?
Yes. Oh, hi, Mike. Yeah. Maybe at the level, because the creative economies one is what we're looking at to collaborate with the University of London on. Again, when we talked about the pipeline, the places where we saw the best entry points, we're part of the Guild and Aroa. This network talks about, and at the moment, actually, the Mastercard Foundation has contributed to Aroa developing capacity by training 1,000 PhDs per year, scholarships for 1,000 PhDs in Africa per year. And that's hugely ambitious, not ambitious enough for Africa. China talks about 100,000 PhDs per year. It's about the same population, roughly, slightly more than the continent of Africa. And we're still talking about potentially 10,000 PhDs for Africa per year. The biggest challenge I have is when we're talking at PhD level, where are they going to come from when only 10% are enrolled in university? And that's a pipeline question. And so I see two entry points into that pipeline. One is at the post-secondary with this foundation training in order to get to BSc level. The other is at the master's level in order to develop good quality master's programs to create, to move to PhDs. It's not to say the bachelors aren't important, but we can find other entry points like the global university idea that I was talking about. And that's where the creative economies, because if you look at the continent of Africa, this is one of the places where you see young people's talents most apparent. And some of them it's raw talent for some. Some are doing undergraduate programs and they have this ambition. And with what University of London does, we feel that it will be an excellent partner to help us multiply that impact by partnering with our colleagues in creative economies here, other colleagues in other parts of the University of London. And they have done this online education in particular ways for a long time. And so we don't necessarily, so Mike will be helping us with that blueprint too. It won't be, but the blueprint at the foundation level is something we've been developing. And we're starting with that teachers, training with the teachers program, but at the same time, as we're talking about the teachers program, we're talking about the level 3, what it will look like. So we're right in the middle of developing that blueprint.
Thank you, Funmi.
Oh, hi, Mike.
Yeah, if I just slightly abuse my position here and just say that one of the things that I think is most exciting and I'm really proud of in the way we've gone about the teacher development is that it's a genuine kind of co-creation relationship with 10 partner universities.
Yes.
And that's been quite, I guess it's been quite slow, inevitably, when you're working across 10. I mean, one university culture is hard enough to work across, but a little bit like Circle U, but without the infrastructure.
Exactly.
But I think what it really speaks to, and what I felt when we met recently in Nairobi, is a real sort of genuine sense of being in this together, that this is a shared endeavour, and that the qualification we produce, although it will be quality assured as a King's qualification in the first instance, the intention is then that any of the partners within the network are able to deliver that locally, with the assurance that it will have that quality. So that feels really important to me in terms of maybe not a blueprint, but a template for how we want to work. The other question from Najat, which I think is again something we've talked about really often, is about measures of success. Yeah. And beyond academic achievements and access to higher education, how do we capture the changes in the lives and communities that show that we're actually making a sustainable difference? So that's a small question.
It's very small. Yeah. I mean, Lucas, you might have some thoughts here, because you have to test with the communities you meet. I've been really proud of the interaction with these communities of learners, teachers, employers, and skills providers in 4 African countries this year. And that was in South Africa, Kenya, Nigeria, Ghana. And I think as you recorded it, we met more than 600 people.
Yeah.
This is a first step in testing that. We need to continue to go back to the 600 at every stage and make them a part of testing this and applying it. And then, of course, we'll get some things right, but we're bound to get some things wrong. And then course correct. This is why the pilot period is very important. And I think that's our journey into testing the impact. But of course, if we also then can multiply this by scaling, then we would even test the impact more. Do we have the instrument to track that impact? That's part of the conversation we're having. And technology will help us a lot, because if you suddenly have 100,000 people that you're reaching out to, you can't be bean counting one by one, right? We need machine effort to help us do that. But it's a very important question. But I think the needs assessment this year, spending almost 1 year on needs assessment, has helped us build a small community of people that we want to work with. Thanks.
Thank you. I mean, I would say maybe not such a small community, but small in the context of what we're trying to do. It's the beginning, but still 600 people is a lot of people to be talking to. Any more questions or comments? No more online either. In which case, I think, can I just ask everyone to join me in thanking all of our presenters this afternoon? I think it's been a fantastic, rich conversation, and thank you so much for giving us your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.